The lights above the locker room hummed with that sterile electric silence, the kind that wraps around a man right before everything changes. Manny Pacquiao sat alone, legs stretched out, his hands wrapped but resting on his knees like forgotten weapons. His team had given him space. They always did in these last minutes, but tonight the solitude felt heavier, not sacred like before. There was no tension in his muscles, no fear in his chest, just silence, and the shadow of someone who should have been there. It wasn't always like this. There was a time not long ago when that same silence had been broken by the soft but certain footsteps of a visitor. No cameras, no press releases, just a man who knew something about farewells. It was 2019 before the Thurman fight, and Kobe Bryant had entered Manny's dressing room like a friend coming home, confident, respectful, grounded. He didn't say much at first. He just looked around, nodding to Boo Boy, to Freddie Roach, to the faces who'd been there through blood and belts and blessings. Then he sat across from Manny and leaned forward. "You know," Kobe began, voice calm like a man reciting something sacred, "you're not fighting him." Manny blinked, not understanding. "You're fighting time." That hit different. Manny had heard it all before. About legacy, about greatness, about how he'd already proven enough. But this was Kobe, not a politician, not a journalist, a warrior who had walked the same line between brilliance and finality. Kobe continued, "This might not be your last, or maybe it will. But either way, fight like it is. Fight in a way that reminds the world why you started. Not for belts, not for fame, but because you loved it. Because this," he gestured around the room, the gloves, the sweat, the quiet before war. "This is who you are." Manny didn't speak. He couldn't. All he did was nod, slowly, as if trying to etch every word into his bones. That night he fought like a man unafraid of endings, like someone rewriting his own epilogue in real time. The Thurman fight was supposed to be a coronation for the younger fighter, a changing of the guard. But Manny defied time, age, and logic. He knocked Thurman down in the first round. He controlled the rhythm, dictated the terms. The arena roared, not just for the punches, but for the reminder. Some stories don't end when you expect. And Kobe had been there, in the crowd, standing in his tailored suit, nodding after every exchange like a coach watching a star pupil graduate. But more than that, he was watching a mirror. Another elite who refused to be measured by time, who fought not because he had to, but because the fight was in his soul. After the win, when the cameras were gone and the blood had dried, Manny sat alone again. Kobe returned, leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You did it," he said. Manny smiled, but there was a quiet sadness behind it. "For now." Kobe just nodded. "That's all we get. Now. The next one's not promised." And with that, he left. Not like a celebrity, like a brother. In the months that followed, something in Manny shifted. He began to study Kobe more, his training mentality, his farewell letter, "Dear Basketball," the way he had said goodbye on his own terms, not by holding on, but by letting go when it meant something. Kobe had once dropped 60 in his final game, not to prove he still had it, but to give the game the version of him it deserved one last time. That idea stuck with Manny. The idea that greatness isn't always in how long you last, but in knowing when to leave behind a moment people will never forget. There were no more casual training days. Manny began to journal more. He quoted Kobe to his team without naming him. Rest at the end, not in the middle. Obsession beats talent every time. He would whisper them, almost like prayers. The world still saw a fighter preparing for another bout, but inside Manny was preparing for something else, a goodbye maybe, or at least the understanding that every fight could now be the last. Still, there was unfinished business. And with every early morning run, every bag session that left his knuckles raw, Kobe's words returned like echoes that refused to fade. "You're fighting time, and time doesn't lose, but it can be made to remember." So, on the eve of what would eventually become his true final fight, that quiet locker room felt different. Not cold, sacred, like a church. The air was heavy with memory, And in that silence, Manny closed his eyes and saw Kobe, not as a ghost, but as a promise. He whispered under his breath, not a prayer, but something close. "This one's for you, Mamba," not because Kobe needed it, but because Manny did, and in that moment there were no crowds, no lights, no belts, just a fighter, a memory, and the silence before one last storm. The morning Kobe Bryant died was like any other, until it wasn't. Manny was in the gym, early as always, doing pad work in silence. The sound of gloves hitting leather filled the space in a steady rhythm, until one of his assistants, pale and shaking, walked in with his phone out. No words, just a look. Manny stopped mid-combination, breathing hard, sweat pouring from his face, and stared. The screen showed the headline, "Kobe Bryant, 41, dies in helicopter crash." There was a strange pause in the world, as if even time didn't know what to do next. Manny stepped back from the pads, no questions, no reaction. He simply sat down on the floor, back against the ring, his gloves still on. For a long time he said nothing. His chest rose and fell slowly, like someone trying to remember how to breathe. Around him the gym grew quiet. Nobody dared speak. Eventually he stood up, walked to the locker room and shut the door. For the next few days, Manny didn't train, he didn't tweet, he didn't speak to media. Not a single statement. People noticed. The world was grieving loudly. Tributes from players, fans, presidents. But Manny's silence said more than any words could. When he returned to the gym, there was something different about him. He didn't joke as much. His workouts were longer, more precise. There was a new discipline in how he moved, a kind of sacred urgency. He had always been a hard worker, but now it felt like something deeper was pushing him, like a vow. One day during a late-night session, a sparring partner told him, "You're locked in, champ, like more than usual." Manny just looked at him and said quietly, "Kobe told me something. Before that fight. I didn't understand it then. I do now." No elaboration, no story. Just that. And then back to work. The locker room where they had spoken was still there, untouched. Sometimes Manny would linger there after training, just standing in the spot where Kobe had sat. Once his coach walked in and saw him there, eyes closed, whispering something. He backed out without saying a word. People assumed Manny would retire after the Thurman fight. It had been a triumphant return, a defiance of time. But something in him needed one more chapter, not for glory, not for legacy, but for resolution. He never said it aloud, but those closest to him could feel it. He was preparing for a final statement, a closing verse to a long, beautiful song. He never chose an opponent for spectacle. He chose one that represented exactly what Kobe had spoken about. Time, youth, doubt. Yordenis Ugas was younger, taller, strong, and hungry. The kind of fighter who'd never share a commercial with Manny, never get a red carpet moment. But he was real, and the fight would be real. In the weeks leading up to it, Manny trained like a man walking towards something inevitable. Not in fear, but in peace. He brought out his old routines. Early morning road work in the dark, ice baths, no distractions. His team noticed he had started to speak in phrases Kobe used. Control the controllables. Don't negotiate with weakness. He wrote them on the mirrors in his gym, taped them to the wall by the speed bag, carved one into the back of his gloves, Mamba inside. Before the fight, there were cameras. Always are. Reporters asking if this was his last one. He smiled but didn't confirm. He never would. The moment would decide. Fight night came heavy. You could feel it in the air like a storm approaching that everyone knew would change the landscape forever. Manny warmed up in silence. No music, just the sound of his breathing, gloves snapping into mitts, and the quiet hum of destiny closing in. Ugas fought well, too well. He was sharp, tactical, unafraid. Manny's legs weren't there the way they once were. The speed, still impressive, lacked the sharpness of years past. He landed combinations, took hits, never backed down. But there was a quiet inevitability unfolding round by round. By the 10th, it was clear, this would not be a Hollywood ending. The final bell rang, and with it, something ancient seemed to exhale. The judges gave it to Ugas, deservedly. Manny nodded, bowed his head and raised his opponent's hand. No excuses, no bitterness, just grace. The crowd stood, not in celebration, but in reverence. He walked back to the locker room slowly, a towel around his neck, his hands swollen and red. Once inside, he waved off the team. Just a few minutes. Alone. He sat on the bench, unwrapped his gloves carefully. His hands trembled slightly, not from pain, but from release. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag. Nobody knew he carried one. He flipped to a blank page and wrote, not quickly, not furiously, just deliberately. A few lines. Then he stared at the page for a long time. When Freddie Roach knocked softly and peeked in, he saw Manny sitting there, the notebook still open on his lap, tears running down his face in silence. He didn't try to speak. He just placed a hand on his shoulder and sat beside him. Manny didn't say what he wrote that night. Not then, not for years. But those closest to him say that moment changed something. He didn't fight again. There was no press tour, no official retirement tour, just silence again. But this time, peaceful. And as the months passed, when asked if he would ever return, he would only smile gently and say, "I already had my last fight. I just didn't tell anyone." The world would come to learn the truth of that moment much later. But for now, Manny carried it like a secret between brothers, between two men who had learned how to say goodbye, not with applause, but with purpose. Years had passed. The gloves were gone. The arenas were quieter now. Manny Pacquiao lived a different rhythm, one filled with politics, community, family dinners, quiet mornings, and the echoes of a life once measured in rounds and roaring crowds. He had become something else, an icon beyond the ring, a man who had given his body to the sport and now gave his time to his people. But the fighter never left him. It stayed in the way he walked, in the way he watched a younger boxer work the pads, in the way his eyes tightened when asked about things he had never said aloud. It wasn't until the filming of a legacy documentary, one meant to chronicle the final days of great athletes, that the moment finally came. The crew had been with Manny for a week, capturing his new life in the Philippines, the markets he visited, the speeches he gave. The way people still called him champ with a reverence usually reserved for saints. But the director, a quiet American with a gentle tone and a deep respect for silence, asked for one more scene. One last interview. Just Manny, the camera, and a chair. They set it up in a sunlit room in his home, windows open to let the breeze in. Manny wore a simple white shirt. No medals, no titles on display. Just a glass of water, a lapel mic, and the weight of what he carried. The questions started light, about his childhood, his rise, the biggest fights, the toughest opponents. He answered them all, kindly, with the same humility that had made him beloved across continents. But then came the question, "You've talked about that fight with Thurman, and then your last one with Ugas. But there's a piece people still wonder about," the interviewer said gently. "Before one of those fights, Kobe Bryant came to see you. You've never said much about what he told you. Would you be willing to now?" There was a long pause. Manny's face softened, then tightened. He looked away out the window for a moment. His fingers tapped the armrest. Then he looked back at the interviewer, not with resistance, but with the face of a man deciding to finally open a door he'd kept shut for years. He nodded once, slowly. "Kobe came to me before the Thurman fight," Manny said quietly. "He came as a friend, not as a celebrity. No cameras, just him. He said something to me that night that I never forgot." His voice started to crack, barely perceptible at first. He looked at me and said, "They're going to remember your wins, your belts. But what's going to inspire them is how you lose, how you fall, and still get back up. That's what lasts." Manny paused. His throat tightened. His eyes filled and spilled over, slowly, silently. He didn't wipe them. He didn't hide. "I didn't understand it then," he whispered. "Not fully. I was still chasing, still trying to prove I wasn't done. But after Kobe died, those words kept playing in my head, over and over. And then, when I lost to Ugas, I understood." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. That wasn't a failure. That was the point. That fight. That was me getting up even as time pulled me down. That was the moment I realized it wasn't about beating everyone. It was about showing what it meant to still fight when everything says you shouldn't. There was silence in the room, but not the kind that needed to be filled. The crew, the director, everyone simply let it be. Manny stared at the camera now, not for show, but as if speaking directly to someone who wasn't there. "You were right, Kobe," he said softly. "They do remember the wins, but they felt the loss more. And maybe that's the real victory." The clip aired months later. It wasn't supposed to be the centerpiece of the documentary, but it became exactly that. The rawness, the truth in it. It went viral within hours. Athletes from across the world shared it. LeBron posted it with the caption, "The realest thing I've ever heard about losing. Respect forever, champ." Roger Federer said in an interview, "It's the most beautiful thing. Two greats who found meaning in the fall, not the finish line." Even Vanessa Bryant shared it, alongside a photo of Kobe and Manny in the locker room from that night in 2019. She wrote, "He lived with Mamba inside. Thank you, Manny, for keeping his words alive." That image, Kobe and Manny side by side, became iconic, not because it was flashy, but because it captured two men who had reached the summit and still cared deeply about the climb. In the months that followed, Manny was asked to speak at youth academies, sports clinics, even grief counseling events, not to talk about winning, but about what it meant to lose with dignity, to fight with purpose, to finish with peace. He began to read from his old notebook during these talks. One day, standing before a group of young Filipino boxers, he opened it to a page with smudged ink and read aloud the words he had written the night of his final fight. "You don't fight to prove them wrong. You fight to prove that you still believe in something, in someone, in yourself. And when the lights go out, if you fought with heart, you never really leave." He looked up. No one clapped. They just listened, eyes wide, hearts open. That was his legacy now. Not just the speed, not just the titles, but the silence, the courage to walk away without needing to be carried, the wisdom to pass the torch without fear it would go out. In the final scene of the documentary, Manny walks through an empty arena. No lights, just the echo of his footsteps. He stops at the center of the ring, looks around, then closes his eyes. The narrator says nothing. There is no music, just Manny's voice in a final recording. "One day the fight ends, but if you gave everything, your courage, your pain, your love, then your name keeps fighting long after you stop." The camera pulls back slowly. The ring becomes smaller, the lights fade, and in the silence one voice remains, not shouting, not cheering, just whispering. Mamba inside.